Guest host Jeff Halash is here to discuss another big industry acquisition, CES news from HP, Lenovo, and Acer, and also a special guest interview with Campbell Hutcheson from Datto. It's ChannelPro Weekly, episode 129, Star Wars Weekly. Hello and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly, episode 129. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor, online director, and your host of this fine audio and, for those on YouTube, video program. Who's this for? This is for you, what I like to say, the MSPs, the VARs, the integrators, the technologists selling technology into other businesses. If you work with a lot of acronyms, you are probably in the right place. Joining me this week and pretty much every week is our executive editor, the fantastic, the awesome, the dapper, Rich Freeman.
And here I am with my co-hosts in a new year. Happy New Year to you. Happy holidays to you and to everyone in our audience.
Yeah, it is a new year, a new decade, in fact. I will start off here before we introduce our guest host, which I'm super excited to have him on. We'll get to him in just a second. I am excited that, Rich, we started this program back in 2016, believe it or not.
Wow.
We've been doing this for almost 4 years. The time flies, doesn't it?
That is crazy. Yeah.
And if you count the number of weeks versus the number of shows we've done, it further highlights the fact that ChannelPro Weekly, our only promise is that a show comes out in a week, right? So it will be a week, some week, but maybe not every single one. Although we're much better about it than we used to be.
So what episode is this? 128, 129?
129.
So 3-4 years, 129. You can do the math, folks.
You can do the math. We
missed
hit
a few
about
weeks.
Yeah, we hit maybe 25. I think I sent you some stats. 25, 30 shows ish a year. But you know, you're a busy man. You're on the road, and we're always trying. And we've had a couple little breaks here and there, as our guest certainly can attest to as well. It's hard. It's hard doing a show every week. But I wanted to start off the 2020 New Year by saying thank you all for being with us and for being patient through the holidays, as Rich and I took a little bit of time off. We are super excited to be here and back. And for our longtime ChannelPro Weekly listeners and newer viewers, we've got a lot of exciting stuff for you this year. ChannelPro Weekly is doing very well, and there's going to be some exciting stuff coming up. Rich, you want to say anything about that?
Well, I'll just say that, if you've enjoyed some of the interview segments we've been doing recently, which, and way back when in the history of ChannelPro Weekly, we were airing a lot of recorded interviews from work that I did out on the road at events. But lately, we've been having folks on live on the show with us. And if you're watching on video, you got to kind of see them on video, too. We've got more of that coming and some really, really good stuff. So keep an eye on that. I will not give away anyone who's on the calendar for us now, but there's some. Let's just say in a couple of weeks we may have somebody who's way up there at a very, very large technology company.
And it's going to be exciting. So let this be your cue right now. Run, do not walk to iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever you get your audio podcasts. If you're on YouTube and you like to watch us do our thing here and watch some of the interviews, subscribe on YouTube as well. Hit that notification bell so you get notified of new episodes. It is going to be a gangbusters year, and we're certainly hoping to do a lot more every week as opposed to having little breaks here and there. We're doing our best, but you have to bear with us because Rich is always running around and he's living in hotels all over the place. But I would like to also say that we have a guest host this week. I am super, super excited to have him on the show. For those who follow the ChannelPro site and follow Rich and I, we made a guest appearance on his program. I believe that was last year. And now we get to return the favor and have him on. Without further ado, host of the brand new, he's going to tell us about this, MSP Unplugged, Jeff Halash.
Appreciate that. Thanks for having me on, and appreciate you guys inviting me now, is this officially the first show of the year?
This is officially the first show of the new year, yes.
Oh, this is awesome. So I get either to really make this a good show or to really mess it up and kind of set the year for you guys.
I wouldn't worry about a bad show with you, Jeff. We had a lot of fun on your program when we did it with you, and I know that you're just an outrageously smart, funny, and interesting guy. So I'm super excited to have you with us.
Well, I appreciate that. And yeah, so for those that don't know me, as Matt has said, I'm Jeff Halash. I used to run a podcast for the last 5.5 years called the Computer Repair Podcast, and had a great time doing that. Last year, we decided to throw an event, to actually have a live event, and we kind of decided to separate from the network that we were on and kind of take our show in its own variation. And so, so this year, we actually, our first debut show will be next Sunday, January 12th, and it'll be called MSP Unplugged, and it'll be over at mspunplugged.com, and eventually will be to all your favorite podcatchers and all that kind of stuff. So we tend to talk about things in business, how to run your IT business, depending on what you're doing, whether it's being a managed service provider or just working in the IT space, even from the corporate side. We just try to deal with a little bit of everything to help people, be better in their business and keep up with the way trends are changing and constantly moving in this industry.
And that they always are, as many people will know when they watch or listen to this. It is the beginning of January, meaning the CES Expo is going on right now in Las Vegas, showcasing all kinds of new technologies that are transformative, some weird, some non-transformative, but all kinds of new stuff to learn and adapt, because this is definitely a ever-changing business. And we're actually going to be talking a lot about some of that stuff. So to give people an idea of what we're going to be talking about, and Jeff Halash will be chiming in here and there as well. We've got some breaking news that Rich is going to talk about that I'm not going to spoil. So Rich, the thunder is all yours. Okay. We're going to dive into some of the CS news. We're going to focus on some of the top brands and some of their things. We could spend 4 episodes talking just about CES. So we're gonna touch high level, chat about it a little bit, and then move on, because we could talk about that kind of stuff all day long. We've got a couple other stories we're going to talk about: a new vendor to watch, and securing the security resistant. Sounds interesting. We have a big interview coming up. We were talking about some of the new laws that took effect in 2020. Namely the California Consumer Privacy Act that took effect, and that is going to have some sweeping impact across all businesses, especially if you work with or have customers or work within the state of California, which is a lot of us. So we got Datto's Chief Compliance Officer, Campbell Hutcheson, to join us and to talk about that in an interview that we'll show you. Plus all kinds of other good stuff and lots of fun. So strap in. Here we go. Rich, there's we had the show all laid out, and then was it just this morning or yesterday morning? There was an email that sent. It was like breaking. We're going to add this to the show. What happened?
Yeah, that was this morning. That was we were recording this on the day this story broke. If you want to know when that is, it was just a few hours ago, actually. And I got the word, just literally as I was waking up, basically, and slapped this article together. It's news in some ways and not so much news in others, because it seems like pretty much every week we're talking about some giant private equity investment in the channel and some company that's familiar to channel partners. And today's news is that Insight Partners has bought Veeam, the data protection vendor, very popular with a lot of folks who are listening right now. Latest private equity acquisition. This particular transaction is valued at approximately $5 billion. So there is a definitive agreement in place for this acquisition to happen. The deal is expected to close at some point in Q1. Interestingly enough, Veeam, which is a Swiss company, is actually going to relocate its headquarters here to the U.S. It's going to become a U.S. company. The 2 gentlemen who founded the company are stepping down. They're going to take their money and move on to the next phase of their life. A guy named William Largent, who up until now, or even at this present moment as we speak, is the Executive Vice President of Operations, is going to become the new CEO when this deal closes. And Insight Partners is, the head of Insight Partners is actually going to join the board at Veeam. They're going to have some other folks from Insight on the board over there, and really kind of try to help Veeam enter the next phase of its evolution. I had a chance to speak with Veeam's channel chief for North America in November. I was attending an Ingram Micro conference, and he and one of the two founders at Veeam who was at that show were talking about this whole kind of second act or act two concept at Veeam. They were founded in 2006. Act one was sort of taking on the virtual machine backup world. They see this much, much bigger opportunity now to get into hybrid cloud data management. In fact, they have a product, a cloud backup product for Office 365. That's the fastest growing product in history for them right now. They collected $50 million in revenue on it in 2019. They expect to collect double that this year. There's a lot of upside for Veeam, which is why Insight Partners was interested in buying them and tapping into the money that will be available to them, tapping into the expertise from Insight. Veeam believes will help it kind of accelerate this act two, the second act in its corporate evolution right now. Larger observation, just kind of taking a step back. I mean, like I said, we've been talking about private equity investments in IT companies for a long time. There's nothing new about that. And within the last year and a half, 2 years and a half, there have been some big transactions in that process. So, I mean, about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, ConnectWise was acquired by Thoma Bravo. We don't know the exact value of that transaction, but there's good reason to believe it was about $1.5 billion. Datto was acquired late in 2017. And again, we don't know the exact number. Good reason to believe that was somewhere in the $1.2, $1.3 billion range. These are big numbers. But now, all of a sudden, just really within the last few months, you're starting to see some transactions happening that are way, way bigger even than that. This is a $5 billion deal. Tech Data was acquired, and that transaction isn't 100% final yet for a few more weeks, but it's likely to go through. That'll be a $6 billion deal. Sophos was acquired late last year for, I think, $3.9 billion. We're getting into these bigger acquisitions right now. And part of the reason for that is buried in the very, very last paragraph of the story I posted on this today, which links to a story posted, I believe, last week by Bloomberg, noting that private equity companies globally right now are sitting on approximately 1.5 trillion with a T dollars worth of cash available for investments and are looking for acquisition targets. And, the IT market is every bit as attractive as it has ever been. And the managed services world in particular, with its recurring revenue model, is especially attractive to private equity investors. So we're going to be seeing, obviously, more acquisitions, and I think more of these big acquisitions coming.
Jeff, as an IT provider, I'm sure you work with some of these companies, and I bet over the last 3 years, a lot of the companies that you've historically worked with have been bought up by one or another, and another. How do acquisitions like this affect you?
We often talk about this, and one of the things that I look at when we're talking about these companies getting bought up, and I think Rich alluded to some of this, is that when these companies are all of a sudden have a lot of money to be able to spend on their infrastructure and in the things that they do, they can make the product better, quicker, faster, all that kind of stuff. So that's a good thing from that aspect. But sometimes you'll see if a company will buy up another company and they can't really do anything with it, what they'll tend to do is pick it apart and, it goes into the wind in several different directions. And so you're left trying to find something else to fill that void. So it's kind of to me, just watching the trends in the industry, it seems like a 50-50 shot of which way it could go. And again, I can't ever blame anybody for making a product and then selling it for, I'd sell for $1 million. Let me make something, just $1 million. That'd be fine with me. I don't even need the billion or trillion or whatever.
Okay, you take $1 million. I will take the other 4.9 billion.
That's fine. I'm good with that.
So $5 billion is a lot of money, Rich. Now, when Insight invested in Veeam last year, was the writing on the wall, or why invest and then buy them outright? What do you think the motivation or the history is here?
That's a great question. And just to be clear in terms of what Matt's referring to there, a year ago, almost to the day, within a week or two, Insight Partners put, was it $500 million, I think, into Veeam. So they acquired a stake in Veeam and have owned a piece of it in the last year. And, quite honestly, it would be interesting to know, whether or not they would have liked to have bought the entire company there and just weren't in a position maybe to make that big, a $5 billion or whatever it would have been at that time, probably a little bit less, that big a deal. Or if this was the kind of thing where you buy a piece of it and you get in, and that's really what gives you a chance to assess whether or not it's worth doing the kind of work that's involved in making a $5 billion. Even for a company like Insight, which obviously has access to a lot of capital, and there's a lot of capital out there right now. It's not a small thing to put together a $5 billion deal. So you want to be sure that you're making the right acquisition. And maybe they were, intrigued by Veeam and certainly intrigued enough to invest $500 million and what they've seen in the last year. And it's been a big year this past year for Veeam. Let's see if I can quickly get to some of the statistics that they gave me a couple of months ago when I was interviewing them. 108% year over year. This is just numbers from the most recent quarter that they've reported on. So they have a subscription priced universal license package that gets you a bunch of different products. Year over year revenue on that went up 108%. Recurring revenue up 24%. In May of last year, they became one of a relatively small number of companies out there, software companies, mind you, no hardware involved, that have a run rate of $1 billion or more in annual bookings. Veeam actually has been growing like a rocket ship for a long time now. 2019 was an especially good year for them. Wouldn't surprise me if, that experience and watching that from the inside is part of what got Insight thinking, you know what, we're going to buy the rest of this company now.
Now, Insight isn't standing alone. TPG is involved with this somehow, right?
No. So Insight and TPG own Kaseya together. So Insight actually bought Kaseya way back in 2013. Last year, Insight sort of doubled down on it, which is an interesting thing, by the way, because there's this sort of rule of thumb in the world of private equity that these companies get in, and typically 3-ish years after they buy in, that's when they cash out. And so that Insight got into Kaseya in 2013, and instead of cashing out in 2019, they actually invested more in that company. And in that deal, TPG, which is a much bigger, really big private equity firm, got involved as well. So they own a piece of Kaseya now too.
So they both own a piece of Kaseya, but only Insight owns Veeam.
Correct.
Which will soon be bought by TPG, which will then be owned and Jeff, when do we end up with just one company, right? Eventually, like there's a bigger fish. There's always a bigger fish that eats the littler fish until there's only one really, really big fat fish.
Didn't you guys have an article where you kind of pointed to who owned who sometime last year?
We did. Yeah. Yeah. And it was this big diagram, just with arrows. So you could kind of try to map it all. Yeah.
Now that's got to constantly be changing, I would imagine.
Well, as I was writing the story this morning, I called that up because I wanted to verify, and I was just looking at it and thinking, yeah, this is tough. I think that went live late summer, maybe. I'm just guessing our July or August issue. It's totally obsolete at this point.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
So now, Jeff, do you use Veeam? Is that your kind of Office 365 backup?
No, I don't. I've seen them at some of the trade shows and stuff over the years. I've vaguely looked at their product. I'm probably using stuff that I started using back in 2010 and have just stuck with it as far as what's in my stack to run my business.
If it ain't fixed, or if it ain't broken, don't fix it. That's what I always say. Well, good, Rich. Anything? Let's talk long-term impact. What is the impact of Veeam now being owned by somebody else?
Well, I mean, I think, the only thing we know for sure is I think exactly what Jeff was talking about there is that, there will be more resources available to them now. And I mean, typically what happens to companies, even a company as big, relatively speaking, as Veeam, is the roadmap gets more ambitious and it moves faster just because developers get hired and there's there are more hands available to do the work. So that much I think we can kind of count on, and again, they're entering the second act. They're thinking big, they're thinking expansively. So it's safe to say you'll not only see new functionality in the products now, but they'll probably start looking to advance into other kinds of adjacent areas. Beyond that, I don't know. Funny thing, I just randomly got an email yesterday from that channel chief I mentioned. And this morning, I sent him a quick little note and asked, what does this mean for your partners? Not surprisingly, haven't heard back yet. I'm sure it's a very busy day for him. He's probably limited in what he can say until this transaction closes. But it's very hard to say what this potentially will mean for Veeam's partners. But I wouldn't expect it to be a dramatic change.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, we'll keep an eye on it and see if we get any reaction from Veeam partners over the coming weeks and months as this closes and things start rapidly evolving as we hope it might. I want to take a brief second, Jeff, as you've been kind of talking. I have noticed the just awesome background that you have there with the Han Solo in the Carbonite. Start talking. I want to see that piece in the back there. Tell me about that.
So Han Solo and Carbonite is one of those fathead stickers or decals that you can buy from, I think it's fathead.com, or might have got it on Amazon. Anyways, my wife and children bought that for me for Christmas. And it's something I've been wanting. It's something that I wasn't going to spend my hard-earned money on, but they did for me. So,
and how tall is that?
It's that's a good question. I know it's 28 inches wide, and 72 inches tall, actually.
72 inches tall. That's great. It really goes off of the motif. Now, you, from what I understand, you collect some of these Star Wars like figurines, and some of these are from your youth. Is that correct?
Yes. So I have my wife kind of came up with this idea of, hey, why don't you, instead of keeping all of your Star Wars toys in a box that we keep moving from house to house to house, and it just sits on a shelf, why don't you put a floating shelf in your office behind you, and that way you can kind of display some of those. So I pulled out all the figures and stuff that I had, the little, I think they're 3 3/4 inches is the average size, and put those on the shelf along with a couple of vehicles and stuff that I had. And then I noticed the other day after I hung Han Solo up that I didn't have a couple of characters. I've been missing a C-3PO and also a original Luke Skywalker and an original Han Solo. So I have the characters from some of the later movies, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and so on and so forth. So I took some of my Christmas money and bought some vintage toys for probably more than what I should have paid for them. But, I wanted to add to my collection, and I don't do it a whole lot, so I thought it would be fun to do. And plus, it makes kind of like a cool background. I don't know that I will get into collecting a whole lot more. I've got, quite a bit to fill up a shelf. I may do a second shelf. I don't know, but we'll kind of see and play it by ear. But all the toys behind me are original toys that are, some are upwards of 42 years old. So
wow.
Most are in actually really good condition, because apparently I was 7 when the original Star Wars came out. And by the time the second and third one came out and I was still collecting, I was probably in my early teen years. So they got played with a lot less and mostly stored in a case over all these years.
That's how you end up with the valuable ones, is like when you had them, but you socked them away and put them in the basement and forgot about them for 20 years. And then you pull it out and you're like, wow, this is now worth, wow, a lot. Well, it's cool. I love the background there. And so I will ask, no spoilers, because I haven't seen it yet. I know, which is shocking. Did you like how the trilogy wrapped up, or the trilogy of trilogies, I should say? So
it's funny because we actually just saw that on Monday, and I was I was just talking to my wife on the way home today when we were driving, and we were talking about the storylines and the stories, and she asked me if I liked the newest, or not the newest ones, but like episode 1, 2, and 3, and obviously 4, 5, and 6 was from my youth, which I really enjoyed. And I said, as far as a storyline, if you were really into like reading the Star Wars books and all that kind of stuff, and keeping up with the comics and different things, you understood some of the storyline with the newer stuff that came out, because obviously after episode 6, there was a story that went on. And so some of the stuff I knew, but what I really think is missing in some of the newer movies, and I don't know if this is because Disney owns them or it's just the storytellers out there, but you kind of, there's things I forget, and there's like no iconic moments. Like when Darth Vader sits there and tells Luke that he's his father, that's an iconic moment. When they, there's just different things that happen in the movie. When Luke and Leia actually, flew across on a rope or whatever it was, a cable, I guess, in the space station or whatever. It was kind of like, these are iconic moments. There's not really a whole lot of that in the new series, as far as I'm concerned. Because there's things that I forgot. As a matter of fact, I forgot how Luke Skywalker actually died in the previous one. So I'm not giving it away because that was way over a year.
That one I've seen.
I can't remember, and so I don't know. It didn't catch me, and it was enjoyable to watch. I watched it on our Super IMAX theater here, which was kind of cool. And it's funny because I don't know how movie theaters make money nowadays. It's a Monday morning at 12:30. It's the largest screen in the state of Michigan. And we're sitting there watching it, and there's probably, there's 4 of us, my 2 boys and my wife, and there's probably maybe a total of 15 people in that whole theater.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard things. I try to close my ears, to some of it. I can only speak to one thing, and then we'll move on, because this is not a podcast about movies. But I have found that the character development in the especially in this last series has been very lackluster. Like they don't seem to change. I do kind of agree with what people say, that like Rey is kind of a Mary Sue character, and she's just great at everything. She's never been trained. It doesn't fit with the lore very well, and they don't seem to be evolving or doing anything with the characters. So I found that to be lackluster. The visuals are great, though. I mean, the effects are wonderful. 7 was, of course, a complete remake of 4, which was kind of disappointing. Like, can we move on with anything other than the giant ball that destroys planets? Is there any other threat other than giant circles?
And I don't want to give anything away, but you're gonna find in the next one that there's a lot of holes in lack of development of. Well, wait a minute, how'd that happen? And you'll ask yourself that several times actually throughout the film.
I can suspend belief for a movie. I try not to dive into it too crazy, but it's still got to be a good movie at the end. And some of the last few have not been as great. But that doesn't mean I still don't love Star Wars. I still love Star Wars. I still love the original series. There are things about the first trilogy that I like, even though I think some of them were very problematic movies. But like you said, you talk about iconic moments. At least even the original, not the original trilogy, but the second trilogy, the 1, 2, and 3, had iconic moments.
Yes,
right. I remember specifically when I didn't really like the pod racer thing per se, but like the first time Yoda fights, I mean, like that was an iconic moment. And when even in the first movie, when those big machines open up and all the drones that are going to fight, like to create like this huge army. That was an iconic. There's lots of and the Darth Maul fight, dude.
Yes,
probably one of my favorite Star Wars scenes.
Absolutely.
Iconic moments. I agree. The only iconic moment that comes to mind is Luke Skywalker like squeezing the boob of some weird alien to get green milk, and that's not an iconic moment I want to remember.
Oh, now that we've bored Rich to death, Rich, do you even like any of the Star Wars movies?
Yeah, absolutely. I won't bore you guys, but I mean, my dad worked in the movie industry. He actually worked on what is now known as Episode 4. I have been immersed in the Star Wars world since 1976. So yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. That's pretty cool.
All right. So Rich, favorite Star Wars movie, go.
This will not be a popular answer, but for me, it is Episode 4 still. That's the one that attached itself to my heart.
Jeff?
I'm going to say Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, I was going to go Empire too. That's still, I think, my overall favorite. With a 4, a very, very close second.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I liked all three of them were, let me tell a quick little story if you don't mind. So I was up camping with my parents, and for some of you that don't know, and I know this has nothing to do with technology, I had these little things called Micronauts. And they kind of were these little, flexible characters that had vehicles and stuff like that back in the 70s. And it looked like C-3PO. So my grandmother looked at it and said, oh, that looks like that character from that movie we just saw. Now, my dad loved war movies. Patton, Big Red One, all, so I had to watch these things when I was a kid, and it was horrible. So I got told we're out camping that we're going to go see Star Wars. My reaction was like, oh, no, we're not going to get another war movie. Oh. So my mind was blown going to see that movie, and I was just like going, the special effects and everything during that era was just, it was outside of anything that anybody had done at that point. It was just like, wow, it really captured you and drew you in really quick.
Much different style movie than like Kelly's Heroes, for example.
Yes.
All right, we better move on before we get into before we have to retitle the whole podcast Star Wars Weekly. All right, so as we all know, CES is going on right now, which is the giant it used to be known as the Consumer Electronics Show. Now I would say it's more known as the Car Electronics Show. But it's actually not. It's just CES now. That's all it is. CES, 3 letters. But it is the world's largest exposition of electronics and technology that happens every year in Las Vegas, right after New Year's. I hate when the timing is of this thing. Everybody does, but Las Vegas is flooded with the tech industry, and there's always all kinds of crazy stuff on display. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that are a little bit more business focused from HP, Lenovo, and Acer, but believe you me, there are an endless number of products and stories out on the internet that you can read about from products coming from this show. Rich, you want to say anything about CES, or do you just want to dive in first?
Let's dive in. And I'll reassure anyone who's concerned that because there is so much going on CES, we could spend 2 episodes just kind of focusing on that. We'll hit some highlights here about the companies that Matt just said. But and we were kind of talking off the air before we started recording. This was not maybe the most exciting CES year, hasn't been so far, just in terms of really kind of mind-bending announcements or new product launches. But there's definitely some interesting stuff going on worth looking at.
And we're going to go ahead and dive right in. So HP will be the first mega company up, and they have a whole assortment of eco-friendly PCs, monitors, and all kinds of stuff they showed off. Rich, why don't we hit the highlights here?
Yeah, well, let's just focus in particular on one product that they announced this week that I think kind of gets to one of the little trends and somewhat predictable trends that is emerging from this year's CES, which is the introduction of 5G ready laptops. So HP got out a little bit ahead of some of the other companies and introduced a new, or announced at least, a forthcoming new edition of their Elite Dragonfly PC. Now, the Elite Dragonfly actually was first shipped late-ish last year, and we didn't actually get a chance to talk about it on the podcast because I didn't get a chance to write about the launch. I was at some conference. I desperately wanted to write about this product and just couldn't dig up the time to do it. It's really their the latest sort of most mobile-friendly premium laptop. So about 2.2 pounds, long battery life, fairly powerful. Some interesting design touches, the sort of iridescent blue metal case. And they're adding actually two really interesting things to it for 2020. And one is the ability to support 5G networking. Coming out of the gate, 5G connectivity will be available exclusively via Sprint, although HP says that there will be additional agreements with other carriers signed. But for right now, all your 5G will come via Sprint with the Elite Dragonfly. And they're expecting that to arrive somewhere towards the middle of the year. The other thing that they're adding to the product, and I honestly don't know if there are other companies that have done this or something like this already before, but this is the first time that I've kind of heard about it. They are embedding a device called Tile in the Dragonfly. Now, I've been aware of the Tile platform for a while because I've really thought of it as the simplest way. We talk a lot about IoT and how hard it is to get into IoT. Where do you begin? The absolute drop-dead simplest thing you can do if you want to start getting into IoT is look into the Tile platform. It's basically just a location-finding device that you can attach to more or less anything, and it'll tell you where it is on a smartphone app or a desktop or whatever. And so people have used it. If you serve construction companies, you just stick these things on all their equipment that they're worried about losing. They can find out where all the equipment is at any given time. It can also tell you where your Elite Dragonfly is, and so they're going to embed this device device inside the PC, so that if you lose it, you misplace it, it's been stolen, whatever, you can kind of figure out where it is. I thought that was kind of an interesting innovation.
The Elite Dragonfly looks somewhat Carbon X1-esque, don't you think?
Absolutely. I almost said that. I almost was going to call it HP's answer to the X1 Carbon, but I thought, that's maybe not fair. But it is, it occupies kind of the same place, I think, in their product lineup of a really premium kind of very light, mobile friendly sort of device.
All right. Anything else HP has of interest?
The only other thing I'll point to, and you alluded to this when you were setting this up, was just that they also announced a bunch of accessories like cases, carrying cases, and so on that are made from recycled plastic bottles. And it was really a big part of their story at CES this year that they are making eco-friendly products. Like the Elite Dragonfly, for example, 82% of the parts in the mechanical parts in the Elite Dragonfly are made with ocean-bound plastic, as HP put it, recycled plastic. So it's a big push on HP's part to use recycled materials in their products. And you could kind of write this off as feel-good corporate kind of stuff, but they've got some data showing that 82% of computer buyers, I assume this is both consumer and commercial, are actually influenced like that. They're more likely to buy something that feels environmentally responsible to them. So there is a business strategy behind it as well.
Now, Jeff, when you shop for computers and laptops, the fact that it might have touched somebody else's lips, is that important to you?
No, not as much.
Or that it held like Era laundry detergent?
No, and I think it's a great idea for any company out there. I mean, we have a lot of waste products, right, that we just kind of throw away and in landfills or the oceans or whatever. And it is a good idea to actually, if you can take that stuff and recycle it. I mean, let's talk about it. Technology of nowadays compared to 20 years ago. There's a lot of things you can do, and we probably should be reusing the stuff that we're throwing away versus just putting it somewhere and hiding it for a rainy day.
I'm all about it. But if the price of the Elite Dragonfly is $300 more because it uses recycled plastic, I would argue that it's not worth it. But that said, if it's a wash or only adds a little bit, I'm all about being economically responsible to use this kind of stuff. But we should do that in all products and not just necessarily this one product,
And I don't know what the Elite Dragonfly costs, but I come from a different background. This is just what I've learned over time is that if you're even an end consumer or you're running a business and you're using a $300 laptop, it's probably not your best use of money. I buy refurbished laptops all the time. So for me, I'm still on a refurbished laptop, still spending $750 because you're getting a lot better bang for the buck and a lot more solid material and something that lasts a lot longer versus a inexpensive one. But with that being said, I don't know what the Dragonfly goes for, but I know some of those are, fairly expensive. I mean, even in the Apple arena.
Yeah, Rich, what is the Elite Run?
I'm
it's
trying
a
to
pretty
look it up
pricey one.
In this article here, if they must have included pricing on that, and I can't find it.
It's so expensive you don't want to know.
It's if you have to ask people.
Yeah, you can't afford it.
So, all right. So they got that. We're going to see a couple themes here as we talk about this, but a lot of new workstation-y high-end computers with GeForce RTX graphics is announced in here, Rich. The NV32 all-in-one, 32-inch all-in-one. That's a pretty big all-in-one at $1,600. Anything interesting there?
No, I mean, like you said, it's really big, and it has some interesting graphics components built in there. It's HP says it's the first all-in-one that's part of the NVIDIA RTX Studio program. A big emphasis in that product, and actually in a number of the HP products, is kind of a thing for them right now. And Lenovo talked about this a little bit as well. There's a lot of emphasis I'm finding on not just on graphics but on audio. And so there's like a 2.1 channel audio system, Bang & Olufsen. There's a lot of Dolby showing up in CES products this year. So it's not a new thing, obviously, for high quality displays to be emphasized, but and maybe it's not a new thing for the audio to be this important either. But it's new to me. I haven't really noticed how much emphasis these hardware makers are putting on the audio experience and immersive, multi-directional kinds of audio experiences.
Yeah, you used to not see a lot of that stuff until you get into the high end. But it is much more mainstream these days, Jeff. The Dolby, I can't remember what they call their notebook solution off the top of my head, but the Hemic 3 is kind of becoming a little bit more mainstream now. What do you kind of see as far as trends in these laptops and all-in-ones?
Well, as far as the audio and stuff like that, I mean, let's face it. Nowadays, we listen to compressed, crappy MP3s in crappy earbuds. So really, the sound to me, if you can recreate the sound, and I guess if I was taking one of these laptops or an all-in-one computer and I could play games on it, which I'm assuming that's what the 32-inch is for, since they're putting a discrete graphics card in there. If I can get a simulated surround sound, and it sounds good, and I can hear kind of the footsteps coming from behind me when I'm playing a first-person shooter or something like that, that might be worth it to me. But really, anybody that lives in a household knows that the actual fact, unless you're living by yourself, you're probably putting on a set of headphones to play these games anyways, or watch a movie or whatever. You're not just going to have that thing just hanging out and blasting away. So I'm not sure how much I really care about that when I'm, buying a set of headphones that does, 7.1 surround sound or whatever, simulated or otherwise.
Yeah, we're gonna touch on pretty much exactly what you just said here in a couple minutes. Jeff, anything about HP's announcements here that you want to comment on? Anything that stood out to you?
No, I think I'm glad to see some innovation, because I'm going to be honest with you. When Rich said a 32-inch all-in-one and the price point was $1,600, I was kind of like, that I was interested. That's because coming from a laptop guy, and a lot of people, if you ever pull apart a laptop, they become a pain in the butt because they try to compress all this stuff in a small area. So to have something that's bigger that I know that I could probably work on. Now, maybe people, I'm a little different. Maybe a lot of people don't really think about that. Hey, can I get this thing worked on? But if you're my customer, it is kind of an important thing to have these devices that can be worked on versus taking that $1,600 every few years, throwing it away and buying something new. So I'm glad to see the innovation as far as bigger screen sizes and stuff like that. And I you know what? For most people, if you're not running a laptop and you want a desktop unit, I think an all-in-one is a great unit to have for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, great. And serviceability is important, especially when you're looking to deploy these things in businesses. You want to be able to service them for sure. All right, Rich, let's move on to the other behemoth of the technology behemoths. Lenovo had a massive display of stuff as well. Now we'll see more from Lenovo in May as they talk about or as they do their partner event. I've been to it many times. Accelerate, right?
That's
Rich?
correct.
Yes, okay. I knew it was in there somewhere. It's a new year, folks. You're going to have to bear with me here. Yeah, so they had a whole bunch of stuff, but a lot of new stuff that they were talking about. Rich, Smart Office and ThinkPad is where we'll start. What do you got there?
Yeah, and we'll start with the Smart Office, just because there's a particularly interesting little product that they've introduced there, and just because it's sort of interesting to me that Lenovo has been focused more and more in the last couple of years on the Smart Office space, and they introduced a whole new Think branded line of products, Think Smart, specifically for that market, and it's really part of a push that they've had going on for a while now, where they're really kind of trying to think beyond products and think more about solutions and help their partners do that as well. Smart Office obviously fits into that story pretty comfortably. So one of the things that they introduced at CES this year is a new product called the Think Smart View. And it's a compact little 2.2 pound device that sits on your desk. It's got an 8-inch HD touchscreen on it, and it's pretty much purpose-built. It's really designed to do one thing, and that is help you conduct video conference meetings, specifically with Microsoft Teams. And the idea basically is if you've got a device sitting on your desk where you can see who you're talking to, and you're doing everything you need to do if you're meeting there, then your main display or displays are available for other stuff. Let's see, 5 megapixel, 720p wide angle camera, privacy shutter. So if you buy it standalone, it's when it begins selling later this month, it'll list for about $349. They have a bundle where you can get a Bluetooth headset from Lenovo as well with it. That costs $449. So not dirt cheap, but not exactly an expensive addition to the desktop either. So kind of an interesting, new product to be talking to your customers about, and in particularly the Microsoft Teams connection, because Teams is sort of the wonder child of the Office 365 suite right now, growing really, really fast. And so there are a lot of people out there who are using Teams. That number is going to be even larger as we look ahead over the next 1, 2, 3 years. Are people going to want a device that's specifically dedicated to helping them use Teams a little more efficiently?
Now, do they say anything about this working with other conferencing suites other than Teams down the road?
I'm trying to look that up because I seem to remember the answer to that is yes, that later on that there would be Zoom editions maybe or something like that for this product. But out of the gate, it's really just about Teams.
Teams is one that makes sense to start with, but I would imagine Zoom Room and other things will kind of, and there's WebEx and there's GoToMeeting. They all have kind of their own versions of ways to hook into devices like this. I would imagine, or at least will, if these kinds of devices start taking off.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, and I do remember this coming up in the conversation with, the channel, like our audience at ChannelPro is very Microsoft oriented, right. And Office 365 is obviously enormous. So it makes all the sense in the world to start with Teams. But there are tons of folks out there using Slack or Zoom or whatever, and it will be interesting to see if this product gets some traction, whether or not there is demand, if there are requests from partners for additions that support some of these other platforms.
Jeff, are your customers demanding things like this to improve conferencing and collaboration and communication?
No, because customers are cheap and they don't want to spend any money. But from our standpoint, I look at it this way: if you think about technology and you think about how it is hard to get the end consumer to hook up into a video conference unless it's a push button thing, I think that this is something that could be used and is probably needed for somebody to be able to push a button and be able to talk to somebody in another office, in another country, whatever, to have that back and forth without having to do anything. Oh, wait a minute, I got resources running in the background on my computer. I got to shut this down. I got to shut that down. I can't hear the audio. All these different things. If you can take that out of it, and I really need to use conferencing in order to run my business, this to me makes perfect sense. Now, I think it's always been our job to sell this to our customers, and I think most of us just really suck at it. So, but yeah, I think it's a good thing. And hopefully, if this is not going to be the only one, there's going to be other companies that are going to come behind them and probably do the similar type of things. But I think, yes, I think even though Teams is probably going to be the number one thing used, it probably is going to have to be compatible with some other software out there that people are already using in their businesses. Yeah, agreed.
It seems like everyone is all like excited about conferencing, and I think maybe the corporations where they can invest in the hardware to do it, and it's kind of like stated in their corporate culture that people are on video. Otherwise, I always see it from who I talk to, like people are okay with conferencing. They don't want to be on video though, especially if you have like a remote staff, like because they're in their pajamas half the time, and they don't want to be on. I don't want to be on video most of the time for our conferences. Right, Rich, has anybody ever been on video for any of our conferences ever?
I mean, you're talking about the staff conferences we do at ChannelPro. Yeah. No, I can't think of any time that anybody has done that. And I mean, for me, these meetings always happen at 8 a.m. So, to your point, I do not want to be seen.
I think the only time we've ever had video on a staff conference is when I turned it on and stuck Mr. Kitty in front of the camera.
Right.
I think that was the only time ever. And it was a historic day. All right. I see some stuff about ThinkPads in here. Anything else you want to talk about with Lenovo in this Lenovo story before we move on to the next Lenovo story?
Not much. So there is a new ThinkPad X1 Carbon out there, the Gen 8. But just looking at it, there's not a ton new there. There are some new privacy features that they've added. There are some unified communication specific function keys that they've added there. So you have one-touch access to VoIP calls and stuff like that. But it's not a huge. It looks like a
hardware refresh. They bumped it to the 10th gen Intel platform, and a little bit more battery.
Right. So if I have owned several X1 Carbons. If you like that product, you're in the market now. You're gonna pick up some specs, but it won't be a hugely different than anything else you've seen before. Same with the new Yoga X1 that they're announcing there. A lot of the same kinds of things. CNC aluminum chassis. I was kind of trying to dig up. Didn't we have some conversation once upon a time on the show? You had mixed opinions about Lenovo doing CNC, or am I imagining that?
I don't know about mixed opinions. Aluminum hasn't really been their thing. I think they'd be better off focusing more on magnesium rather than aluminum, just because it's a little bit more durable. But the Yogas,
it's also a huge fire hazard, but we won't talk about that.
Well,
don't put a flame anywhere near this.
Let's just hope that lithium-ion battery inside doesn't explode. But assuming it's not on fire, right? The magnesium's more durable and just as light. But I think that my only reservation with Lenovo doing aluminum, and I don't have a huge reservation with it, is that that's kind of Apple's thing, and I like that Lenovo has kind of staunchly been the anti-Apple, and it seems like that's becoming less and less these days, which is too bad. Jeff, what do you think of the Carbon and the X1 Yogas and those high-end ThinkPads? You a big fan of those?
I've never used any of them, but I know several people that do, and yeah, especially the X1 Carbon. I've heard nothing but good things about people that rock those as their daily user, and the Yogas even. Yeah, I remember when the Yoga first came out, and they had the flip around screen and all that kind of stuff, and it was okay. Nobody really did that, but
Twist. Remember the Lenovo Twist?
Yes. Oh my.
Yeah, I remember reviewing that thing when it first came out. It was mind-boggling.
I think the HP, Lenovo, Dell they're all trying to be innovative, which is good. And quite honestly, let's face it, I know there's a lot of Apple curmudgeons out there that, they live in the Apple verse, and that's fine, especially if you're a creator or something like that. But I like Windows. I'm comfortable with Windows. I think Windows, works perfectly fine. And so for these manufacturers to, kind of keep up with appearance, fit, and precision and all that kind of stuff, I think it's good. It kind of keeps the ball moving, and it's not going to let Apple sit on their haunches and not do anything. So I think it's a good thing.
I agree. All right, so Rich, we have more from Lenovo as well. I will point out, for those who are following along on the audio version or on YouTube, we put links to all of the stories that we're talking about in our show notes section on the ChannelPro Network website for this episode. So find episode 129 on the ChannelProNetwork.com site. You can go and you can read along, and there's a lot more, especially in these news stories that we're talking about. There is a lot more that we're talking about here. There's Think Center announcements and some other things in the HP one that we didn't even mention. So if you're on YouTube, go to the show notes description area, open that up, and then you'll see links to all the stories, so you can follow along and get all the detail as we kind of talk about it. And don't forget, if while you're on the show notes page, subscribe Apple and the Apple iTunes podcast thing. Jeff, help me. The Apple Tunes.
It's not iTunes anymore. It's Apple Podcasts, I believe. Is the
Apple Podcasts. Yes, that's what it is. It's the Apple Podcast. Holy cow! So we were just riffing on Apple, and now we're like, oh, go to Apple and subscribe.
Exactly.
Apple Podcasts, Google Play Podcasts. We're there too. Stitcher. Subscribe on YouTube as well. Hit that red button and then the little bell if you want to get notified of new episodes. Rich, Lenovo's done a lot of crazy things over the years. Throwing an e-ink display on the cover of a ThinkBook is kind of weird.
I think it's a really interesting concept. So, we were just talking about before, it was the first wave of products from Lenovo. It was more kind of commercially oriented. One business day basically later, they came out with a bunch of consumer products, or at least this was their consumer wave. But included in it was one product in particular we will zero in on here, because it's an addition to a product line that landed Lenovo on our All-Stars list last year. So last May, they introduced a whole new hardware Think brand, the ThinkBook line, of affordably priced, reasonably priced laptops specifically for the SMB market. And it's just an interesting, we at ChannelPro thought it was an interesting mix of style and design and price point and performance. And so we included Lenovo on our All-Stars list last year. There is now a new ThinkPad, ThinkBook. It is the ThinkBook Plus. And as Matt said, it's a 13.3-inch device, but on the outside cover, there is an e-ink display. And it comes with a stylus, and the idea basically is you're typing away at your desk and you're doing work, and then you go off into a conference room for a meeting and you close the lid, but now you can take notes on the cover of the device. And they have, obviously capture that and do what you're going to do with it later to integrate it in with the rest of your work. They've done some interesting things to kind of filter out what you can actually do and see on that e-ink display too. They really do have collaboration in mind for that. So it will show you some things, about incoming emails and instant messages, but not other things like maybe social media and so on. And I'm looking to see here, that is due to ship in March. It will list for just under $1,200 and up.
So I'm trying to find a picture of the product this reminds me of that Asus made. Jeff, help me out. They had a laptop that had it was a screen that was also on the cover. On the other side, there was a color LCD, like another screen.
Right.
What product was that?
I don't remember, to be honest with you.
Okay, Jeff, what do you think of this? Oh, well, for a couple questions actually. What do you think of the ThinkBook line? Because I have some opinions on it. I'm curious, as someone who deploys notebooks and works on notebooks, what you think of this kind of newer SMB focused line from Lenovo, and also of putting an e-ink display on your cover.
I'm not as familiar with that particular line, but I would say as far as the e-ink display, I know there's some other products that are coming out that people are using for jotting notes and stuff like that. And I'm just coming from my standpoint, I don't like taking notes on paper because my handwriting is horrible, and to go back and look at those is so painful, so I generally don't. So to have an e-ink display that I can jot stuff down and have it go into some format where maybe I can do, it can go into a type format, that I think it would be useful. Again, it's a retraining thing. And you're talking to a guy that went to cell phone only in 1999. So I have no landline since 1999. Actually, it's funny because now I actually have a landline for my business, which I didn't have for years. But in 1999, I was like, no, I'm cell phone only. Forget it. All that stuff's gone. So to me, some of this stuff is new and probably a fair bit exciting. It's hard to get people to change the way they've always done things. I've always been one of those people that have said that technology is supposed to make you more efficient, and actually it doesn't. It just clogs us up with many more things to do and to maintain and to take care of. So I think it's good as far as the product line, or as far as the e-ink display. I just don't know what the adoption is going to be for the actual, end consumer that's running a business.
Yeah, Rich, what are people saying? What's Lenovo saying about the uptake of ThinkBook?
Actually, I didn't get a lot out of them on how big a splash ThinkBook has made at this point, so I don't really know. But I'll just quickly jump on something that Jeff was saying there, which you were alluding to the fact there are various products out there that people can use to jot down notes in meetings. And I've actually even investigated a few of these because I go out on the road with an iPad, and that's what I use in interviews to jot down notes and have my questions ready to go and all of that. And so anytime I, come across some potential replacement for that, I'll kind of do a comparison. Should I be using that instead, kind of a thing? But what it made me think of when we were talking about that is the other thing, for me at least, is I'm always happier with fewer devices versus more. So it's like if I can take that separate thing that I'm traveling around with and taking notes on and embed that in the cover of my laptop, as long as that, it's not going to break or whatever, that actually is kind of an appealing idea. Oh, okay, I was traveling with 2 devices. Now I'm traveling with 1. That might work for some folks.
So why e-ink, though? Why, other than the power savings, which I could see, and the fact that it can stay on the screen, why not just another color LCD screen?
From my standpoint, when I think about e-ink, and I struggled with this over the after Thanksgiving, the whole Black Friday thing, and I went to get a Amazon tablet, and I was going to get an e-reader, and part of the reason now I've actually I got one for my mother-in-law a couple years back because she was using a regular 7-inch tablet, and I'm like going, it's not good for your eyes. You need to kind of take the eye strain off. Let's get you this e-reader because all you're doing is reading books. Now, for me, I ended up going with a color tablet because not only do I read books on this thing, but I'm also reading comic books, which are better in color. And then I'm looking at different drawings and different things that I have for schematics for things that I build. And so it's nice to have some of those things in color versus just black and white. Do I need it? No. But that was kind of my compromise. So I think the reason to go with the e-ink is because it's going to be better on the strain on your eyes. Because let's face it, we're already in front of too many devices for too long, and it's going to have an effect for a lot of people.
I mean, that would be my guess too, is just that they really thought of this specifically as a note-taking device in meetings, and paper is white and the ink it doesn't really matter what you don't really need a color display for that. If you're going to watch movies or something that really benefits from color, well, open it up. But if you're using that display for the purpose that they built it for, black and white it should be good enough. And to your point, Matt, it also doesn't burn up as much power.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet that that's one of the primary reasons was for the battery. Richard, there was another thing in this one that I wanted to touch on before we moved on to our next couple stories. There is a PC they released that runs on the Snapdragon 8CX 5G platform. You want to talk about that?
And that is a consumer-oriented product.
It is, but it's also one of the first PCs released for that platform. So I didn't know if you wanted to make mention of that or not.
Well, I won't say a lot about it, but this does actually follow on to a trend that I highlighted when I was talking about Lenovo. So this or HP, excuse me. This is Lenovo's first 5G laptop. Here in North America, it will be called the Lenovo Flex 5G. It's a little confusing this year. They have different names for some of these products in and outside of North America at Lenovo. In North America, it's the Flex 5G. It's the Yoga 5G everywhere else in the world. And that gives you an idea of the form factor. It's a convertible. You can put it in tent mode and so on. And yeah, according to Lenovo, it's the first PC on that particular Qualcomm 5G platform. No word. I actually asked them, who is your 5G carrier? If HT is going with Sprint, who are you going with? Folks I was interviewing weren't quite sure, so I don't know who they're coming out of the gate with. But that product will weigh 2.86 pounds. They're saying you can get 24 hours on a charge, which I always get excited about. And I'm looking to see the when the release date is on that. I'm not seeing it, but yeah. So that's their answer to the Elite Dragonfly. That's their 5G product, and unlike the Dragonfly, this is targeting consumers. Although they were very clear at Lenovo, there will be commercial 5G laptops coming soon.
Yeah, Jeff, what are you interested at all in the Snapdragon based PCs?
No, I mean, only because even when you're talking about down at the laptop level, it's a night and day difference going from a desktop or desktop computer to a laptop to a tablet. And so some of these lesser processors and stuff, I don't know. It doesn't really excite me that much. It's kind of like 5G doesn't really excite me either. It'd be nice, but is it really going to be as good as they say it is? And maybe not. I don't know. So I'm kind of an old curmudgeon when it comes to some of that stuff. Wired everything just because wireless is nice.
Maybe it'll be great. Maybe it'll give you brain cancer.
Well, either way, that too. There's that. I didn't want to bring that up, but you're right. Yeah, there might be some health risks involved there. And no, let's face it, we've been doing stupid things our whole entire lives, putting electronics near us, by us, being around them all the time. So. Who knows? And we're not ever going to know until it's too late, unfortunately.
That is the truth. But you know what? You could go your whole life not putting electronics by your head and being as healthy as possible. And then one day you're going to be crossing the street and be hit by a bus. It's just the way it is.
There you go. Okay,
just the way it is. All right.
A morbid term for that.
Rich, anything else from Lenovo's CES exhibition worth mentioning?
And no, I would say I'm going to pass the baton to you because you had an article that went up yesterday about what's new from Acer.
Yeah, so I covered the Acer line, which Acer's they're really trying hard to get more of a business B2B lineup out there that's attractive and try to pull some of the. So when I look at the big behemoths, we didn't even talk about Dell, but you see the B2B market, you normally think HP, Lenovo, and Dell, and then Acer and Asus, they're kind of on the outside, really trying to work their way in. And they make some nice laptops for sure, but generally considered a little on the cheaper side. But they kind of made a splash, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that they got coming out here. One, they have a couple new entries in the TravelMate line. So for those who have played with the TravelMate notebooks before, they're nice. They're usually pretty thin. They have a new P6 that has a different magnesium aluminum alloy chassis. We talk about that. It's mil-spec tested, so they're kind of going that durability route. Lightweight, and if you do the 4-cell battery option, when synthetic testing, battery lasts 23 hours for an Intel-based PC, which is that's a lot of battery. That's a really good. That's also synthetic, of course. But a couple of years ago, when we were just talking about the Qualcomm Snapdragon stuff, one of the big exciting reasons to move to the Snapdragon platform, if Windows could emulate Win32 and x86 on Snapdragon, was to get these laptops that have massive amounts of battery life. And as we're starting to see with the 10th gen Intel stuff and the AMD Ryzen 4000 series, the new mobile processors that are built on the 7 nanometer fab process, we're starting to see crazy amounts of battery life in x86 processors as well. So I'm starting to wonder, other than the deep integration of cellular into the stack, I don't know if Snapdragon has much of a life in x86 computing as we move forward. Hard to say. So 2 nice laptops there. Nothing overly exciting to talk about. There's also the new Spin 3 and Spin 5, which are kind of more small office student kind of targeted, so that they kind of fold around yoga style. These include a Wacom stylus pen for taking notes and stuff like that. 2K displays. The one that I think would be more noteworthy here is the Spin 5, which has a 2K display with a 3:2 aspect ratio, which I think really, really works well for productivity computing. So we have that. Decent battery life, nothing outrageous in here, but good pricing. Spin 3 at $699, Spin 5 at $599. They have 2 other things. One that's not bound for North America, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. And I realize I'm the one talking here, not like showing pictures. So I should be showing pictures as I do this kind of stuff. So the one that I'm going to talk about here is the Concept 700D, Concept D700, workstation. So this is a kind of a workstation class machine that Acer is releasing to start in Europe, and they didn't really talk about whether or not they're going to release it in the US anytime in the near future that I saw. But they kind of have this kind of Scandinavian design with wood grain tones, rounded corners. Rich, have you ever seen Rich or Jeff, have you ever seen a workstation that looks like that?
It's pretty.
It is pretty, isn't it?
It is. And this kind of story pops up more and more. I wouldn't call it even a trend, but I do run into this kind of thing. And it's not surprising to me that it would be a workstation product that they're focused on here. I remember probably a year-ish ago writing about a new printer that came from Epson, and they had really kind of focused on the case and the design and making it pretty and so on, because this particular device was designed to be used by architects and people who might actually be design conscious. And I imagine that's part of what is going on here, is that the target market for this, there's probably people who have some big Apple all-in-one or something on their desk now. They like seeing something pretty on the desk, and this might appeal to them, but they need horsepower. This might be the device that they look at.
Yeah, and in the horsepower department, that workstation, even though it looks pretty on the outside, it's got a lot of oomph on the inside. Latest gen Xeon, 64 gigabytes of DDR4 ECC RAM, Quadro RTX graphics. So definitely no slouch in that department. Also kind of expensive. It'll be interesting to see if it gets a US release. But as Jeff has pointed out, customers don't always like to spend money, and usually when you get the fancy design stuff in the United States, Apple just seems to have that market just kind of locked up. Pretty.
And
well.
the other thing too, I think sometimes when you're building or when you're looking at a workstation that you need all this power, with the stuff that they have out there that you can actually build. And I know there's a lot of people go back and forth on this, saying, you can't make a market. I actually have a good friend who actually sells hand-built PCs and laptops now to for CAD programs and stuff like that, to architects in other industries like that they can do it a whole lot cheaper than a lot of times what these other lines can come out at. So it's, again, and you can still make a good, decent profit at it. And I've always looked at that, and Matt, I'm sure you're the same way. I can build an awesome gaming machine for, I don't know, let's say $1,500 to $2,000. That same machine from a boutique company is going to be $5,000. So
depending on the case and the cooling, that's for sure. It's funny. I just built a new machine right over the Christmas kind of holiday.
Oh, nice.
Right now I think the build versus buy sweet spot's right around $700 is kind of where I see it. But as you go into the higher end gaming stuff, sure. But when you look at a lot of the gaming PCs you buy, though, a lot of them have much more outrageous cooling than I would put in a machine, and nicer cases. Like I went with a decent case, but nothing great. But I told the audience I mentioned my what I built over the holiday in a future show. Maybe we'll talk about that next week. Otherwise, we're going to go way, way long. I do want to talk about one of the more interesting products that Acer put out, and it's called the Concept D Easel. So I'm gonna warn Acer and any of these companies who decide to get creative with the spelling of words. I am going to always mispronounce it because that's how I roll. So this is the Concept D Easel series going forward. And so this has a unique screen and hinge design. A lot of the laptops have kind of a lot of the convertibles have like the hinge where it kind of fold over, and it kind of gives you 4 usage modes, like a laptop mode, a flat mode, a tent mode, and like a presentation mode. Well, this kind of has this weird 5th mode that makes it somewhat like the Surface Studio, where it's kind of like a creative sketching kind of mode. It's a really interesting looking product for content creators in particular. Those who would use a stylus a lot, I could see how you would absolutely love this. And it's no slouch in the power department either. It's 10th gen Intel Core H series, 32 gigs of RAM, NVIDIA RTX graphics. So they are packing a lot into this. This is definitely a pro level product. There is a pro level SKU that ups it to a Xeon platform as well. But I think a lot of the excitement here is going to be in the 10th gen Intel stuff because it's a little bit cheaper. But what do you think? What do you think of that design? I have never seen anything like that.
It looks pretty nice. I mean, as far as I'm with you, I kind of looked at it and I go, for a person that actually touches their laptop screen now, who said they absolutely never would. Sometimes it's just easier to do things on there, believe it or not. For something like that, to have it hold up at that angle and be able to draw on it or do whatever you're doing, for a certain group out there, I'm sure it would be, beneficial. And I always look at it from anytime you make something that has more moving parts, obviously you have more parts for failure. So there's always kind of that balance too, but it looked like a pretty solid built machine from the pictures there.
Yeah, definitely not cheap either. So the standard model starts at $26.99. So again, this is definitely premium class, pro level. I didn't mention the display when I was running through the specs. It's a 400 nit 4K display. It's also fully calibrated with Pantone matching system. I don't always understand all of this stuff, but true to life
like
color,
anybody knows what that
100%
is.
Adobe RGB and a color accuracy of Delta E2, E less than 2, I guess is how you would pronounce it. I don't know. I don't know what a lot of that means. I'm not really a studio designer, but I'm sure that's important to people who would work on graphics and video and film and 3D modeling as part of their job. Rich, what do you think?
Well, first, a question. How big is that display? Is this a 15-inch?
It's a great question. I don't know. I'm not sure I'm sure they said it in the
It looked like
release.
about 15.
Probably a 15.6.
Yeah, that would be my guess. For this audience, you would think that would, yeah. So I would, it's sort of like you were saying. I mean, for people who work with the stylus a lot and are on the screen a lot, this would actually be a really interesting. It's not maybe your main work machine, but it might be something that you take home at night, take to meetings. It would actually be a really interesting device to have in meetings. Take out when you're traveling and so on. So I mean, it really does come at a premium price. So it has to be something that really, really fits your work style very closely. But if it does, I haven't seen really anything else like this. And I can imagine some people thinking I might spend a little bit extra for something that is that much more convenient for me. I guess the alternative to this is just a convertible, like a Yoga or whatever, where you're flipping the screen around and maybe going into tent mode as opposed to. And unfortunately, people who are on audio can't quite see how this display works, so it's a little bit hard for them to understand what we're talking about. But
yeah, if you're listening, just go and search Acer Concept D Ezel, and it's basically like they mount a hinge on the kind of the center of the back of the screen, so it can kind of fold on top of the hinge or fold underneath the hinge, and do all kinds of. There's a lot of interesting presentation and ways you can orient this to work with it. It's cool. It's one of the cooler ones I've seen in recent years. And the only one I've seen like this. Jeff, have you seen a laptop like this?
No, that's the first time I've ever seen a laptop anywhere near that. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, the closest I can think of is Dell had that one where like the screen kind of flipped in the frame a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
But this is still totally different than that, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool stuff. I like where Acer's going here, and I'm a big fan of like the Surface Studio, and kind of how it has that kind of like canvas drawing kind of mode that you can do, and this would fit right in with that. And yes, it is a 15-inch screen. I did manage to look that up. I don't know how I missed that. I'll probably have to add that into the story. That's about it for the Acer notebooks, but that's not all that we saw from Acer. So Jeff, I'm really excited to hear your opinion on this next story. But Acer, okay, let's just back up a second and look at the market of gaming monitors. Now, Jeff, gaming monitors have become more and more insane and ridiculous over the last few years, as they push these massive sizes and curved displays, and it's amazing. Now I see kind of a basic monitor in the back there. I think that's a basic monitor. Have you ever like used one of these like big curved gaming screens?
It's funny you say that, because actually the monitor is my previous monitor there, and that's I believe that was a 32-inch at the time, and it was a Dell. It was one of their high-end ones. I spent $1,100 on that particular monitor, and it had the color gamut and all that kind of stuff, and it was a beautiful display, still 60 hertz. So I decided, it was sometime last year, I bought a 34-inch Alienware, which obviously is Dell, and it's got the curved display, and it's the wide, ultra wide, whatever they want to call it, and it's 120 hertz. And I'm going to tell you right now, at first I didn't know if I'd like the curve. I actually love the curve. I actually have that in front of me, curved, and I have two 24-inch monitors on either side, so I'm rocking 3 monitors, plus another little Dell monitor for my Intel Nook that I got from one of your guys' shows years ago. And so I actually like it. And going from 60 hertz to 120 hertz, especially when you're playing first-person shooters, night and day difference. The mouse lag is like non-existent at 120 hertz. And I didn't know what I was missing. So for me, I'm not always going to go out and buy the latest, greatest thing, but every few years, probably every 5 or so years, maybe even 7, because that monitor is pretty old. I'll go out and I'll kind of look and read the reviews. And so they've got some pretty big monitors coming out, 49-inch, all this kind of stuff. Where I'm like, yeah, it'd be interesting, but the problem is pushing that much horsepower, especially with a 2080 Ti, your RTX series from NVIDIA, which I have, and it still struggles on certain games, believe it or not, even at the 34-inch ultra wide.
Oh yeah, for sure. But if you like big monitors and crazy sizes, prepare to salivate, because Acer has got some stuff for you. So they announced 3 new additions to the Predator gaming monitor series, and they're just awesome. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at these real quick. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the Predator X32 with NVIDIA G-Sync Ultimate. So there's a 32-inch display. This is, of all the monitors we're going to talk about, this is actually their most technologically advanced and highest quality display that they have. Jeff and Rich, have you ever heard of local dimming? So that's the backlight is comprised of little mini LEDs, and that they can be individually controlled with a backlight in order to improve HDR. So this has more local dimming zones than I think any display that I've seen yet. Now, I haven't gone out and looked. There might be one that's more, but this is around 1200 zone local dimming. It's an IPS panel, display, 4K display resolution, HDR 1400 certified, 10-bit color accuracy, and all that good color gamut stuff. And of course, it's G-Sync Ultimate, so it handles a lot of things like variable refresh and a lot of that kind of stuff. So that's also a very expensive monitor, I will say. It's going to be $3,600. I wish I could see it in person. I bet it's visually just amazing. It also has 3 HDMI ports, a display port, and 2 4-watt stereo speakers that I point out that no real gamer would ever use.
Right. You got that right.
Why they build speakers into a high-end monitor, I have no idea, but they do. So they're there if your headphones are broken and you need to listen to something. But wait, there's more. So Jeff, you talked about the curved, and well, they are not going to leave the curved market alone. So there's also the X38 gaming monitor. It doesn't build off the high quality IPS panel and stuff like that, but it does add what they call the 2300R curve. So it's not quite as curved as some of the other screens that are out there, but it definitely increases the peripheral view. NVIDIA G-Sync processor built in, various levels of adjustment, and I was trying to catch the resolution. It was 2K times, but out to the side. I didn't know if I put the resolution in there, but it'd be, whatever.
It's hard to tell with the resolution because mine's a whatever 3440 by 1440 or something like that, and there's really no. It's not 4K. It's not really. It's kind of 2K because it's 1440. So it's very confusing when you're trying to look at these monitors and figure out what's going to be. I'm always looking for the best bang for the buck. When I'm buying a monitor, because I don't want to. I'm not spending $2,400 on a monitor, or $3,600 to save my life.
Yeah, right. It's. I was trying to catch the resolution because I can't remember if it was still 4K or 2K. Because I know it's a UWQHD plus. That's helpful. 3840 by 1600. So the vertical is not quite 4K, but that's a lot of pixels.
It's pretty close, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like a weird 2.5 kind of K resolution, but really nice. Really nice.
Looks nice.
It looks nice. Yeah, it looks sweet. So if you think that 38 now is like, wow, that's amazing, Acer has got a proposition for you. And Rich, how did I put it up here? Like, the next one is if do you ever watch Crocodile Dundee?
Jeff? Yes, I have.
So there's a scene where the guy, the mugger, comes up to him when they're walking around the streets of New York, and he pulls out the knife and he says, "Give me your wallet."
That's not a knife.
Right. And she's like, "Oh, you better give him your wallet." And he's got a knife, and he's like, "Oh, that's not a knife." And he pulls out that giant thing. He goes, "That's a knife." And it's like this huge knife. So if you were to assault McDundee with a gaming monitor on the streets of New York City, the one he's going to pull out of his pocket to say, "That's not a monitor. This monitor is the new 55-inch Predator CG55." It's some weird model number. But Jeff, take a look at this thing. So this thing is gigantic, right? 55-inch gaming screen. So now when you get to these sizes, I note here that there's some philosophical questions about whether this is really a gaming monitor or it's gaming more of a specialized gaming TV, because the specs read more like a TV than a gaming monitor. It's an OLED display, but it is 4K. But this seems to also be very color calibrated and have a lot of that kind of stuff. 128 hertz refresh rate. It's adaptive sync and G-Sync compatible. So I don't know if you're going to set this on your desk and sit in front of it, because you would sear your face off with a 15. You're going to destroy your eyeballs with this thing, Jeff.
That's a large. It's a television, and so there's always been that the people out there that will look and say, if you have X size monitor and it's this far from your face, then it's like watching a movie at such a size or whatever. So there's all these kind of arguments and stuff. Now, what was the price on that one?
This one, $3,000.
Okay, so that's not horrible. And 120 hertz refresh rate in a 5 millisecond G to G. So it's quick.
Which is good, typical for an
Sure.
OLED display for sure. It sounds like it's like kind of like a TV, but it's got some stuff built in to kind of make it more suited to gaming. The inputs are certainly more PC focused than TV focused. For some reason they put in a proximity sensor that turns the thing on when you walk up to it, and then turns it to sleep mode when you walk away. Jeff, why is this useful?
Wow. You know what? I can just see problems with that. Hey, I moved out of the screen or out of the shot of the screen, and all of a sudden it dims on me. Wait.
Yeah, Rich, I see Rich doesn't do a lot of gaming, but like when I go to play a PC game, I turn on the game, and that magically turns on the monitor too. So whether my presence here is implied when I start gaming, is it not?
The interesting thing is there's been some chatter. There have been some products in the hardware world that have done this on the commercial side in conjunction with something like Windows Hello, where it's like, okay, you sit down in front of your computer, you're ready to work. It sees that you have sat down there and it wakes up, and then Windows Hello sees you. And a lot in a gaming monitor, though, this is new to me.
It's a weird addition. I'm not sure what the point is. Maybe somebody from Acer can email me and tell me why. But that said, I mean, I don't want to harp on a feature like that's like a big deal. It looks nice. If you want a giant gaming screen, it's hard to right now get any bigger than this unless you just go and use like one of those bigger OLED or LCD TVs. But those are not always optimized for gaming per se.
Well, in the new generation too, they're not really. A lot of them don't even have TVs. And my daughter she's a college student, and she was watching everything on her laptop. We ended up buying her a 32-inch television for Christmas, and she was appreciative because now she gets to watch stuff on a larger screen. But it's not necessarily something that they would have spent their own money on. And I think I see a lot more of that. So again, I could go out and get a 55-inch screen TV. Matter of fact, I bought one, a TCL off Amazon a couple years ago, and it was ridiculously low. It's a 4K. I mean, it's a beautiful screen, and that's good enough for me. But to spend $3,000 on the same size, I don't know. It seems like a lot.
It does seem like a lot, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, we'll just have to watch the gaming monitor screen and sizes and this market. And you're right. The youth today, they're very different than the way we are as far as like the types of things that they own and how they use them. So this might be the future of displays for people. We'll just have to see. But anyway, we're going on about monitors a lot. Rich, anything on Acer's lineup you want to talk about?
Well, something totally random that isn't actually about those products, but it's very amusing to me. So I have a new iPhone here. And while you were talking about Acer there, Siri kept lighting up, and it kept catching my eye. And I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, I'm not doing anything. I'm not touching it. Why is Siri waiting for me to ask for something? And I realized after a while, every time you said Acer, it heard, "Hey Siri."
Interesting. So I have just been making everybody's iPhones just go crazy.
I think so.
Let's talk about Acer some more. Acer.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I didn't even know that was enabled, actually. So while you were talking, I went into the settings and turned that off. I don't actually want my phone listening to me 24/7, but that was interesting.
It's funny. Even if you turn it off, it's still probably listening to you.
I'm sure it is.
This is a scary time when it comes to privacy and all that kind of stuff. But, well, that's funny. And if I was making your phones do crazy things, well, laugh about it because it was funny. All right. Rich, we got two stories, other stories that we want to talk about. We're going to move on from CES. Other stories, you said these are going to be quick. So first, we got a vendor to watch.
In fact, we won't even talk about it because we're running a little long, and I don't want to keep people waiting from our very, very interesting interview any longer. So I'll just tell you what they're about. We'll have links to them in the show notes, and you can kind of look them up more. They happen to touch on two things I think are kind of important. One of which
why don't we do this? Why don't we just move it from this week to next week? We'll talk about it next week.
Okay. Well, we can hang on to it and say, well, we might have more stuff to talk about next week. But
well, it's up to you.
That's fine.
It's up to you.
Well, then I'll do the 30-second overview of each one, and we can move on. So one of them it's a vendor to watch piece about a company called Blanco. technology group, and I'm all about, if you're an MSP out there, I am all about that, the thing that you can add to your bundle that's going to help you raise the price. $2, $3, $5, relatively easy to deliver. It adds value to the customer. You're not just bleeding them of money. What Blanco makes is a really good sort of business-ready technology for deleting data, and that is part of the life cycle, folks. When you're getting rid of a device, when you're getting rid of stuff that no longer needs to be archived, you have to dispose of it responsibly. There are regulations that require you to do that and to prove that you've done it and audit that and so on. So there's tons of freeware out there you can do that with, but a really business-ready product is going to deliver the reporting and so on that you need. That's what Blanco does. For MSPs serving particular industries, this could actually be a really smart, very easy kind of add-on to your bundles that'll help you make a little bit more money, a little more wallet share with your customers. And then the other article I was going to highlight is a story that we call Securing the Security Resistant. And this is a topic we've actually touched on, I'm sure, on the podcast before, which is that you can sit down with your customers and you can tell them all about the risks that they run from ransomware and everything else if they don't invest in security. But at the end of the day, to Jeff's point earlier, they don't like spending money, and many of them are just going to say, no thank you. Haven't had a problem before, no thank you. And what do you do with those customers to protect them if you can, but also to protect yourself? Because when, not if, but when something goes wrong for them, you will be the first call they place, and they will be angry at you. We've got a story about that. You can kind of take a look at some of the advice that we got from the sources we consulted.
It is a matter of when, not if. That is pretty true. Yeah, security is important. It's going to be bigger and bigger in 2020 than it was in 2019, and it was already a pretty big thing in 2019. So get ready for that. All right. Thank you for that. We'll put links to those two articles in the show notes about the vendor to watch and securing the security resistant. Make sure you go and check those out. There was a lot of good information in there. Sorry, we couldn't dive in a little bit more deeper on those. We're running along, and we've got lots of good stuff still ahead. In fact, we're gonna take a break, and when we come back, we're gonna cut over to an interview that Rich and I did earlier in the week with Datto's Chief Compliance Officer. His name's Campbell Hutcheson. And what we're going to talk about primarily is the California Consumer Privacy Act and what that means to MSPs. How is it going to affect them? What do you need to know about it? So for a lot of you may not realize that all these new laws just went into effect at the start of the new year, and you're on the hook to follow them. Jeff, do you know that there's new laws?
I do, and it's like anything else. It's very hard to keep up with. It's kind of like the tax law. You know, it's constantly changing, but yeah, it's going to be, you're going to have to pay somebody to, decipher all that stuff and make sure that you're doing what you need to do in order to keep yourself and your customers safe out there. Because, there's things that, like you said earlier, that some people would just roll the dice and go, if it happens, I'll deal with it then. But it's probably better to get ahead of, these things that are coming, even though they're a pain, I know, and some of them don't make a whole lot of sense. It's still something that we're responsible to do.
Well, and some of them may very well be an opportunity, and we're going to talk about that as well. But I will say you can roll the dice, and if you're dealing with hackers, that's one thing, but there's nothing worse than dealing with lawyers. And that's why you want to conform to the law. So we're going to take a break, and we'll go to that, and we'll be back right after this. And we're back, and we have an interview segment this week, one that we're excited to have on. There's a lot going on around new laws that took place as 2020 started in the new year. One of those is the California Consumer Privacy Act, which gives a lot of new rules and regulations about selling personal data for people in California. And that's kind of throwing MSPs off in all different directions and making things much harder for people. And so we have a great guest on today to talk about some of that stuff. His name is Campbell Hutcheson, the Chief Compliance Officer at Datto. Welcome.
Welcome. Hello, Rich. Hey, Matt.
It's great to have you on. For those who maybe aren't familiar with you, could you give us a quick rundown of who you are, what you do, and how you ended up at Datto?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Campbell Hutcheson, and I'm Chief Compliance Officer at Datto, where I run our data privacy program. I was brought into Datto in order to sort of collect together the disparate parts of data privacy that we have throughout our organization and sort of unify them into one program. And I got into data privacy when I was originally studying law, and I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to go into something more adjacent to technology, and data privacy seemed like the perfect thing. So that's sort of how I got here and sort of what I do.
Fantastic. And so you're mostly here today to talk a lot about the new CCPA laws that come into place and some of the challenges that's presenting for MSPs. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what the CCPA is for those who may not be familiar with it and some of the new laws that took place, and what kind of struggles and challenges you're seeing MSPs that are going to face coming from that?
Sure. So the California Consumer Privacy Act is a regulation that sort of idea began in the 1970s and the 1960s. When large amounts of data were beginning to be collected into databases that were being stored on computers, and people were trying to figure out what the right way was in order to regulate that. And in the 1970s, the sort of first data protection laws came into effect, which were designed to help protect personal data being stored in electronic systems. And in particular, they came into effect in Germany in 1978 when Germany got its first sort of countrywide data protection regulation. Data protection regulation then began to sort of develop in Europe and developed into a number of regulations, but most notably the Data Protection Directive and then the General Data Protection Regulation. And at the same time in the United States, there were sort of piecemeal laws being created, not to protect personal data as a whole, but in order to protect particular parts of particular kinds of sensitive personal data, like electronic protected health information or banking information. And so these sort of sector-specific laws were coming into effect. I think then what sort of happened that sort of caused California to drop the sector-specific style and to try to adopt a sort of more general regulation to protect personal data in whatever form it took, in whatever industry it was being used, was the Cambridge Analytica scandal, in which it was found that people were taking personal data and they were using it for commercial purposes without people's consent. And even more concerningly, they were using it to sort of intervene in politics and do things that people thought had real societal ramifications. And so the California Consumer Privacy Act is a regulation created in order to try to give people control over their personal data in a way that will make people more trusting of sort of information society services that we now use.
So, people hear California Consumer Privacy Act, they assume this applies in California. Maybe it doesn't apply to me. I'm somewhere else in the country. But this very much has implications for MSPs and their customers all over the U.S., correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So one of the things about just California is that California is the largest state in the United States by economy and the largest state in the United States by population. And wherever you are, you likely have California consumers or California residents who are doing business with your business. And you're pulled into the California Consumer Privacy Act by virtue of having California residents' data that you store and use for commercial purposes. And so, yeah, this isn't relegated to MSPs in California, but affects MSPs wherever they are throughout the United States, because their customers will certainly be doing business with California residents.
Now, there are certain sort of minimums, as I understand it, built into the CCPA law in terms of which businesses it applies to. So it won't necessarily apply to every small and mid-sized business. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. The exceptions are sort of interesting. One of the and you have to meet all three of the exceptions in order to not be pulled into the California Consumer Privacy Act. One of the exceptions is around revenue. You have to have less than $25 million in revenue. One of the exceptions is built into how much personal data you store. You have to store less than 50,000 individuals' personal data. And the third one is sort of around what percentage of your revenue you derive from the sale of personal data, if you sell personal data. But I would, if a person is interested in whether or not they fit into the exceptions, I think it's really something that you want to consult an expert on, because there are a lot of different exceptions under the California Consumer Privacy Act. And you might have to be knowledgeable about the California Consumer Privacy Act, even if you qualify for all of the exceptions, because your customers might not. So if you're a managed service provider, you might fit the exceptions, but your customers might not. And so in order to work with them and in order to help them in their sort of IT requirements that come out of the California Consumer Privacy Act, you're going to have to maintain some level of knowledge about it.
Now, this law, it's got implications, both for MSPs and for the companies that they support. So maybe let's start with the end users. For an MSP or another channel pro who's listening to the podcast right now, what is it that they can do, that they should be doing to help their customers prepare for and comply with CCPA?
So it's really interesting. I think that a good place to start is to talk about what are the things that the end user is going to have to do, and then sort of back out from there to how the MSP can help the end user achieve those things. So things that the end user is going to have to do is first create a notice where they tell people whose data they collect, what they collect, how they collect it, the categories of service providers that they share it with, and in certain circumstances, legal rights that they have regarding that data. In order to prepare a notice like that, an end user is going to have to understand what they store so that they can write that up in the notice. And that's something where they're typically going to have to contact their IT service provider so that they can work with them to figure out what are the places that they store data and what's in each of those places. Because people don't really know what they store until they do a real inventory of all of the places in which they store personal data. People sort of, when they think about data, they think about what they need when they're going to get it and not what they store as a whole. And it's very enlightening and necessary to do an inventory of all the data that you store. So that's sort of one place where IT service providers will certainly, play a role. Another sort of thing that end users have to do is they're going to have to start responding to data subject access requests. And data subject access requests are requests where a data subject, that is a person whose personal data it is, comes to a company and says, I want to know what you store about me, and I want access to the data that you store on me. And in certain circumstances, I want you to delete that data. And in order to respond to a data subject access request, what a business has to do is a business has to go to all the places where they store personal data. They have to figure out how to export the data from those places. They have to figure out how to crunch it down so that they're only providing a data subject data that's theirs and not data that's somebody else's. And they have to sort of give it in a tangible form to the customer or give it in an accessible form to the customer. And that process involves touching a lot of IT systems. So a place where managed service providers are going to be very helpful to their customers is in helping them on the back end to collect this data together for data subject access requests. They're also going to be involved if the data subject asks for data to be deleted. I'm going to say right here that you don't always have to delete the data, and that might be something we come to later. That might be something that people are interested in. But that's going to be another place where MSPs are going to be a touch point where they go into various IT systems and they delete data from those IT systems to comply with a data subject access request. So at a high level, providing sort of a roadmap of the data that a customer stores so that they can draft the required notices, and then helping them when people come and make data subject access requests to that business, helping them to provide that data to the data subject.
And so, I mean, that's at least as much about consulting in a sense as it is about technology. I mean, it doesn't sound like you need to be running some new compliance management software, implementing some new product. It's really about consulting with the customer, helping them understand where the data is, and then helping them manage that data.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. All of the tasks that I've described can be done with a spreadsheet. They don't require purchasing new software packages or buying a new enterprise resource planning system or anything of that nature.
So, I mean, on the one hand, this is compliance is mandatory. This is something that you have to do if this law touches any of your customers. But it also sounds like it might be a revenue opportunity. Should channel pros listening to the podcast now be thinking of this potentially as a new service that they can provide to their clients?
Yeah, absolutely. They should be thinking about it as a revenue opportunity in terms of helping customers perform these like data mappings that the customer needs in order to draft their notices, and in terms of creating potentially a value-added service in order to help them respond to data subject access requests. That's one of the things that we saw in Europe when MSPs had to help their customers follow the General Data Protection Regulation, which was sort of Europe's equivalent law to the California Consumer Privacy Act.
Yeah, you mentioned GDPR there. Are there any lessons that we've learned from the GDPR experience at this point, a year or two into that might be applicable to CCPA as well?
Yeah, I think one thing that we've learned is that first, that there's a revenue opportunity for managed service providers. That's one thing we've learned, that when regulations come into effect that affect data privacy, it creates a lot of work for companies around their IT infrastructure, and that translates into dollars for managed service providers who help them with their IT infrastructure. Another thing we've learned is that there becomes an increased focus on security. So the California Consumer Privacy Act contains penalties for companies that fail to maintain adequate security to protect personal data. And we found that when regulations like the California Consumer Privacy Act or the General Data Protection Regulation come into force, it's a good time for managed service providers to have an informed conversation with their customers about security. And that often translates into customers spending more on security, upgrading their security, so to ensure compliance with the new regulation. So we see a lot of opportunities for managed service providers when these kinds of regulations come into effect.
So, HIPAA is a great example of a regulation that mostly has implications for a business that works in healthcare, but also affects the MSPs who serve anyone who's in healthcare. Similar kind of story here. So we've talked a lot about compliance from an end user standpoint. In terms of the actual MSPs and other channel pros out there, what do they need to do to make sure that they're compliant with the law?
So there are going to be a couple of things. The first thing is any MSP that's looking at California Consumer Privacy Act compliance first wants to make sure that they don't fit into the exceptions. Because a lot of smaller MSPs aren't going to be large enough to hit the dollar value threshold, or might not maintain large enough customer relationship management databases to hit the number of individuals threshold. And most managed service providers certainly don't sell personal data. So a lot of managed service providers might sort of fall into the set of exceptions for which the California Consumer Privacy Act's requirements aren't directly applicable to them. So that's one thing that they're going to want to investigate. And I recommend that they get legal advice in order to sort of figure that out. I think it's worth it. And it's an important thing to do. For companies that do fall into those, who don't fall into those exceptions, they're likely to be on the very large side. And they might have their own sort of internal legal staff who are already sort of taking a look at it. And really, at the end of the day, it's going to be a fairly sort of simple exercise where they put up the appropriate notices to tell people what data that they're collecting about them. They set up the appropriate procedures in order to handle data subject access requests. And they get, agreements in place with their service providers that label their service providers as service providers, which is sort of a concept under the regulation where a company can be labeled a service provider. And for most companies, that's going to be advantageous. But to label their service providers as service providers, and for the service providers to be labeled service providers. But that's on the large side.
Yeah, using maybe Datto as an example of someone who is sitting in a position where you have to really think about compliance, especially as a company as large as Datto. What are some of the things that you've had to think about in terms of becoming compliant, and some of the challenges that you've faced getting Datto compliant with new laws?
Well, it's really interesting. So for the California Consumer Privacy Act, the answer is it's actually not a very substantial challenge, because at Datto, we already have a substantial data privacy program in place. We do business in a large number of jurisdictions. Europe has been leading the wave of data privacy and data protection, and we're fully compliant with, in order to be fully compliant with European regulation, at Datto, we've had to implement very robust data privacy practices. And so editing those practices where necessary in order to meet California regulation isn't very difficult. I would say in general, though, what we do is we always have our ear to the ground. We're always looking at new jurisdictions where new data privacy regulations are coming into effect. The second they come out, we eagerly read them to make sure we know what they entail, and then we begin to operationalize it as far in advance of the law coming into effect as possible, just so that when the day hits, when the law comes into effect, we're not scrambling, and we know that we're in good shape.
Now, there's been a lot of these new privacy laws. We talked about GDPR, and we talked now about the CCPA. I would say, and I would be curious to see what you think, that this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of privacy law and regulations around data collection, data harvesting, usage of personal data. What kind of additional things do you see in the future that is going to affect MSPs in this regard?
Sure. So I see a couple of trends. The first trend I see is just increasing geographic scope. So right now it's the California Consumer Privacy Act. New York is considering a Privacy Act. Connecticut is right now creating a committee in order to try to consider a Privacy Act. So there are a lot of different states that are looking at creating their own equivalent of the California Consumer Privacy Act. And we're going to start seeing those popping up all across the United States. So that's the first trend, increasing geographic scope. The second thing I think we're going to begin to see is we're going to begin to see concern around things like automated decision-making, which is where people make decisions about customers or about employees as a result of sort of computers making the decision on their own. This is sort of, it's part an artificial intelligence concern, part just an ordinary coding a decision tree style of concern. But we're going to see more regulation in that sphere. Right? It's coming down the pike. Europe already has it. The United States will probably introduce it relatively soon. And so I think those are sort of two trends. And I think the third trend is just going to be increasing enforcement. You're going to see more enforcement actions against companies that fail to maintain hygienic data privacy practices. And those enforcement actions will both be costly for the companies that are subject to them in terms of penalties and fines, but will also have very negative public relations consequences for those companies. And so you're going to see a lot of focus on companies trying to make sure that they're following hygienic data privacy and security practices so that they're not subject to fines and so that they don't suffer public relations hits when they are subject to an enforcement action.
In the process of setting this interview up, you folks at Datto shared some data that you had come across. It was collected from the security vendor ESET, and it indicated that a shocking percentage of channel partners out there are not aware of, not ready for CCPA. So, I mean, from your perspective, how ready is the MSP community right now for this law? And maybe as a place to kind of wrap this up a little bit, what are the things that somebody listening to this interview who is new to all this should do to kind of get started on the road to making sure they and their customers are compliant?
Sure. So I think that the MSP market is sort of in the United States is sort of in its infancy in responding to data protection laws. Outside of sort of a set of narrow fields like healthcare or banking, the MSP market hasn't really had to deal with difficult data protection laws, and this is sort of the first one. So I think that the MSP market is in its infancy in responding to data protection regulations. I think that things that MSPs are going to want to do is first, they're going to want to figure out if they're subject to the California Consumer Privacy Act. That's the place that they should begin, and they should work with outside counsel in order to find out A, whether or not they're subject, and B, if they are, what they need to do in order to comply. And then I think as sort of a secondary step, having to figure out their own compliance will help them sort of understand the point of view of their customers. And then for customers that are subject to the California Consumer Privacy Act, they're going to know. So the customers are also going to be driving their own California Consumer Privacy Act initiatives, and then they're going to be coming to the managed service providers with workloads associated with those California Consumer Privacy Act, compliance programs. And MSPs are then going to want to work with them to help them understand their IT environment and to help them craft processes in order to get data from their IT environment and deliver it to people who make requests. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying, first, MSPs need to become compliant themselves. And second, they need to be good consultants to their customers when their customers come with questions. Yeah,
now, Datto's got a lot of tools that MSPs use to help kind of run their business now. Is Datto developing or working on anything to help MSPs with compliance challenges with their customers?
So I think that's an interesting question. I can't disclose any of the products that we have in R&D right now. But one thing I would say is that at Datto, we always try to make sure that when we provide a product to MSPs, that it lightens the burden on MSPs rather than making the burden higher. Like, we want to create products that are easy to use and that automate MSP workloads so that MSPs don't have to do an increasing amount of work in order to accomplish their jobs. And at the moment, I think what we've seen from most people who provide compliance tools to MSPs is essentially spreadsheets in web form that the MSP has to complete and that output sort of a score at the end and that the MSP can take to their customer. I'm not sure that the products on the market, I'm not sure that the room is there yet for the kind of innovation that would let us create the kind of quality product that we would want in order to support MSP compliance efforts. But certainly, if we see that opportunity available, it's certainly not something that we would shy away from.
Excellent. That's great to hear. Now, before we wrap up, is there any other final thoughts you have on compliance you'd like to share with our audience or about Datto's role in this?
Yeah, I guess what I would share is that we're living in a very exciting time. It's always easy to forget that the internet only appeared, to most people 2 decades ago, and that smartphones, the iPhone was first released in 2007, and that that voice assistants only appeared like a year or two ago. It's very easy for people to forget like the pace of change, but it's really rapid, and it makes fields like data privacy that are adjacent to technology tremendously exciting. And sometimes it's important to step away from the technology and look at the societal impact that it has and what we're doing to address it. And that's sort of what data privacy regulations are and are about.
Well, fantastic. It is definitely an exciting time, and certainly one that is ripe with change. No doubt, hitting on a lot of the points there with all of these new types of ways of even collecting data through smart assistants and through cameras and beyond just the kind of forms and just normal data collecting practices we've seen. So you're right, it's exciting, and it's gonna be an interesting area to watch as the laws catch up to conform to kind of regulate some of these businesses. So I'd like to thank you very much, Campbell Hutcheson, Chief Compliance Officer for Datto, for taking the time to join us and talk with us about this topic. And hopefully we'll see you back in the future. For everyone else, if you want to hang on, we're going to be back with part 3. We're going to go into our normal end of the show kind of features. We'll have a museum pick and a tech pick for you this week, as well as Rich telling us what has been, so like what has happened. He's really, really good at predicting the past. He does it with uncanny accuracy. And then he tries to tell us what's going to happen in the future. And he's like, what, 30%? What did you say, Rich?
On a good day.
On a good day. So that's going to be worth sticking around for. We will be right back. And we are back. And man, what a great interview. I'd like to really thank Campbell Hutcheson for joining us and talking about that. It is really hard to find people who really understand and have a good grasp about compliance and what it means. And boy, he was just well spoken and articulate. And I hope that you see that not only in this case for MSPs, the laws are things you have to deal with and you have to help your customers deal with, but it also could be an opportunity as well. Rich, how did you think that went?
I thought it was really, really interesting. He lives in that world all day, obviously. And it was interesting to know that he has a legal background. So, he really kind of he knows his regulations. He knows how to sift through those. He knows the implications. So, and he's just, by the way, a super articulate explainer of this kind of stuff. So he was actually the perfect person to have on the show to get into this with.
Yeah, by far, I think going forward when we run into new laws and especially around compliance, we know some other good people who are really smart in compliance too. His name's escaping me. Rich, the guy who runs the compliance group.
Mark Haskelson, yeah.
Yeah, he's also really, really good.
Yep.
But I would expect you will see Campbell Hutcheson again in the future when we run into these kinds of things because they just understand it far more than we could ever try. And the thing is, even though it was more than we could ever try, you have to be able to deal with this stuff as a business owner. Jeff, so I know that you weren't a part of that interview, but is CCPA something that you're already looking at and making changes around?
I wish I could say yes. I'm gung ho and I'm ready to get in there and deal with all that stuff. But the truth of the matter is, no. I try to take things in stride and listening to interviews on your show and stuff like that with these experts actually makes my life a little easier because they kind of will tend to point me in the right direction of the things that I need to be thinking about as I'm growing my business.
So when this comes out, definitely go back and listen to this interview because there's a lot of stuff in here that's gonna be very good for you to know. All right, so we're gonna move into our end of the show roundup of features. It's a new year. Yeah, give me a break. I'm so rusty, it's ridiculous.
Star Wars, last episode. Oh, no.
It's true. My head is still stuck in 2019. No, we're gonna do our kind of a normal end of the show roundup of features, and Rich will give us the kind of preview and what has been. So, Jeff, we talked about it a little bit, I think, on your show, maybe, but or at least off camera. That you and I are very different. Like, you do not hold on to old things other than your toy collection, but when it comes to technology, you're like, if it's old, get it out of here. Is that right?
Yes, and part of that probably started with when I would go to places like GameStop to trade up my video game systems for the next system out there.
I could never do it. I could never go into a game store and be like, here's this game that I spent $40 on. Give me $2.10 towards the next game. I would much rather just have my game.
Thinking about it nowadays, yes, but back then it was like either turn all this stuff in to get a new video game system and maybe one game, or just keep what you got. So
I kept what I have, and as you can see from the shelf behind me, and as Rich knows, other shelves in my house, I don't throw anything away, and that's the thing. So this segment is we've been doing this for a long time now. It's our museum pick segment. So as Jeff is coming to understand, and as for those who are new to us will also understand, I don't throw things away when it comes to technology. If it plugged in, has buttons, or particularly a screen, most likely, as long as it still works, that's my one caveat. It has to work. It is still in my possession. I call it a hobby. I call it a collection. My wife calls it a disease. Either way, you win because we get to look back at all this old cool stuff. And it spans categories, Jeff. I got everything from consumer electronics to video games to PC, a lot of PC hardware, and so on and so forth. So we try to pick a lot of interesting things week to week to talk about. So when we were chatting before the show, you mentioned that you saw a Sega Genesis out in your travels somewhere, and you were thinking about picking it up. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. So
in your honor, on the fly, my museum pick is going to be the Sega Genesis with in this case, the Sega CD add-on.
Oh, I had that same thing too. That was
So this is the second or third generation Genesis with the second generation Sega CD, which had like the flip top model. So for those who are listening, imagine not the first Genesis, but the second one that was a little smaller, and then the Sega CD unit that had the pop-up lid and not the drawer. I have kept my eyes open for a first gen, and I have not been able to find one for a very reasonable cost. But I do have this one over here. I have good memories of the Sega Genesis and Sega CD. If people were to ask, I would probably say I'm more, at the time, I was more of a Nintendo person. I probably still am. But I really did enjoy a lot of the games that the Genesis had. and have fond memories playing it. Jeff, were you like Genesis or Nintendo?
No, my friends had Nintendo. I bought a Sega Genesis in 1989 out of the Sears catalog when I was stationed in Germany. So when I got this system, probably one of my favorite games that I played all the time. And for those that are out there that don't understand, how gaming has changed, I should say for the sissies out there that have to have saves for everything that they do in order to, get through these games, we didn't have things where you could save the game. You had to play through the whole thing. And I remember playing hours and hours of Altered Beast. Loved that game. It was just, the creature would, the guy would change into a creature, and it was just awesome. But it was a lot of grinding to get to the end of that game. And you're like, don't lose power, don't shut it off. I got to get through this.
Yeah, Genesis had a lot of great side-scrolling beat-em-ups, like the Golden Axe series.
Oh, Golden Axe, that was awesome. Yes.
Yeah, they had those. They had there was a bunch of other good, like the Streets of Rage. Remember Streets of Rage?
Streets of Rage. Yep.
Yep.
What was your favorite game on your Sega Genesis?
That's a hard one. My favorite game. There was a Sega CD game I really liked because it was very innovative and creative, and it was originally on PC. It was called The Adventures of Willie Beamish. I don't know if you like that one. I really liked the voice acting that they added to the Sega CD version, and I thought that was a really good creative adventure. Kind of a kid my age at the time, so I'm a little younger than you. So it hit a little more at home to me. I liked some of the Sonic games. I played a crap load of Evander Holyfield's Real Deal Boxing. Probably one of my favorite boxing games on any system ever. Lots of fun. I didn't really play a lot of the RPGs on the Genesis. I did like the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat better, though.
Oh, yes. Yep.
I thought that played a lot better. So there's a couple of them. I'd have to probably look at the entire catalog and be like, oh, and pick out an absolute favorite. But those are some of the games that I played a lot. There's a couple of the Sega CDs. I actually liked Echo the Dolphin a lot. I showed that one to my daughter, and she really liked that one because at the time it was about a dolphin, and it's like there's nothing violent in it. It was kind of cool, kind of a weird game if you've never really played that one. So yeah, fun stuff. So that was my museum pick. Rich, now do you have fond memories of your Sega Genesis?
Never owned one of those. My first gaming console was like the original Atari game, whatever that, so that's how old I am basically. But
the 2600.
I have fond memories of that.
So Rich's favorite game is Pong.
Yeah, exactly.
Little lines go up and down the screen. Bloop, bloop,
I do remember when Pong came out, and it was just a miracle.
Changed his life forever.
Yeah.
All right. So that's my museum pick is a Sega Genesis. So not like a computer hardware business you kind of pick today, but a fun one to look back on. I've got a lot of old consoles, and we haven't even looked at remotely anywhere near most of them at this point. But a fun one. So Jeff, I also do a tech pick every week. So and a lot of times I like to play, well, that was then and this is now. And give a kind of a tech pick that's more recent and modern. And you know what? I'm going to keep the theme alive and say that my tech pick is the Sega Genesis Mini. Right? So last year in September, following the trend that like Nintendo did when they released like the NES Classic and the SNES Classic, that kind of like runs, I believe, emulated games on these little boxes and plugs into modern day TVs and comes with the controllers and a selection of games. Well, Sega put their own out called the Sega Genesis Mini. Comes with a good selection of games. It's $79 list. I know you can find them cheaper than that. And Jeff, it comes with some of the games like that you were even talking about. It comes with Altered Beast. It comes with like the Streets of Rage 2, Shinobi 3, the first Golden Axe game, Vector Man, which was, I don't know why that's in this collection. I thought Vector Man was a terrible game personally. Virtual Fighter 2, I also don't think that was a very good game. But there are also some other good ones. Road Rash 2 was on here. Jeff, remember the Road Rash games?
Yes.
Oh, those are awesome. Awesome games. Kid Chameleon's on here. Wonder Boy is on here. Is a pretty good game. Earthworm Jim is on here. I think it was better on the SNES personally, but that's just me. And Toe Jam and Earl. Do you remember Toe Jam and Earl?
Oh,
Jeff?
yeah. Yes, I do. That was a classic.
That was a weird freaking game. Yeah, I think the first one, that was the one where you like, if you went to the edge, you would like fall down to the level below, and you have to do that level again, and then take the elevator. This weird mystical. Yeah, it was whoever did that game was like clearly on acid.
Yes.
And Echo's on here, and of course Sonic is on here too. So lots of games. It's 40 games. I think the collection could be a little bit more generous given the system, but it's certainly not bad. And it's hackable if you have the ROMs. You can put lots of games on it.
There you go.
You didn't hear that from me though. That was like some weird voice that just took over the show for a second. I don't know what that was all about. So check that out. We'll have links. We'll have a link to that in the show notes if you're interested in the Sega Genesis Mini. Get it on Amazon, any game store, pretty much anywhere you go, they should have it. So that is it. My museum pick and my tech pick. Rich, if you were to try to guess what happened, you'd probably be right.
That much I could probably handle as far as guessing is concerned. Yeah. And fortunately for us all, we can turn every Friday on channelpronetwork.com to our own James Gaskin for his In Case You Missed It post, where we round up news from the week that was that maybe we didn't get a chance to cover elsewhere. You know, believe it or not, because we spoke quite a bit about CES, but there is more news from CES out there, and James is going to round up the highlights for you. Plus, there's a new CEO at Avanti, a North American managing director at Kaspersky. There's more news as well. So check that out on Friday, every Friday, in fact. And then looking ahead. Now, this is harder to do, Matt. Guessing the future. Not so simple to do, but this.
And you know what? You're wrong like 50% of the time.
Which is not bad. That's
which actually is pretty good for being a seer and gazing into a crystal ball.
These predictions I have high confidence in, which is that the NRF, right, retail's big show, the National Retail Federation's show, which is the big technology event for retail, is taking place. In fact, there's already some retail tech news breaking just today in relation to that. Citrix is holding its annual Citrix Summit partner event next week, and then Auvik, the network management folks, are doing their very first customer event, partner event, in Santa Barbara, and I will be attending that, in fact. So next week, when we do the ChannelPro Weekly show, I will be broadcasting from someplace in Santa Barbara.
Fantastic. We look forward to it. And that's going to wrap up episode 129. A big thanks to Jeff Halash for joining us as our guest host today and chiming in on all these stories. And it was a long show, Jeff. Thanks for hanging with us with CES and a big interview. There's just lots and lots of stuff to cover, especially with it being our first show after being off for 2 weeks.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So for those who want to learn more about you and check out your new show that's coming up, MSP Unplugged, where can they go? Where can they find you? Where can they follow you? What do they have to do?
Well, you can, and everything is being worked on right now, but you can eventually you'll be able to go to mspunplugged.com. And that was one of the reasons for naming the show that, because the .com was available, and I'm a big .com guy. So
I joke all the time, like so many business. That's why we get so many weird business names these days, is because like you have to name your business on whether or not the URL is available.
yes,
that's why we have like Zeter.com and figglefraggle.org or whatever.
And E's apparently are, they're bad. So everybody takes E's out of their names in order to get the .coms. But you can find me, you'll find me out on the Ethernet there. Eventually our show will be coming to iTunes and all that kind of stuff. So definitely look for it here in the next few weeks. Once, I think, you can also look for me on our YouTube channel, and it's mspunplugged.com. Or MSP Unplugged, I should say, on YouTube. Check us out there. We do a live show every Sunday, and it's at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and where we sit there and just chat with a couple other folks about what we do. Actually, one of my partners, Paco LeBron, him and I sit side by side, and also with our friend John Dubinsky, and talk about things in our businesses and things that are coming up and things that we need to work on, and what other people are thinking about. And we've got a pretty good chat room where people hang out, ask questions during the show, and we try to answer as many of those as possible and have a great time. So you can check that out over there. That is always currently working. Because we're making a transition right now.
Yeah, well, good. Well, I have watched many episodes of the show you used to do, and I always enjoyed it. And I'm sure the new one will be just as good, if not better. So, folks, please go and check out MSP Unplugged as well. We'll drop some links into the show notes as soon as you get your website working. We'll throw a link over to the YouTube channel for you as well, and go and check that out. So, thank you again so much for being here. If you want to subscribe to ChannelPro Weekly, that is what we recommend doing, because A, you don't have to worry about checking the site all the time if we put a new episode up, and B, it just shows up on your phone or your tablet or whatever, just magically. It's like, what do you know? Here's a new show that I can listen to. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Podcasts. We're on Stitcher. Most of the podcast catcher aggregator kind of sites have us. So you should be able to find us. If you have like a favorite podcast app that you just need an RSS link, you can get on any of our show notes pages. ChannelProNetwork.com is the website. Please go there. If you like watching us, we are on YouTube. You can subscribe there, hit the notification bell so you get notifications of new episodes. We'd love to have you. Drop some comments in there. I think we even talked about doing a little New Year's resolution stuff. Rich, I completely over the holidays forgot to check to see if anybody posted New Year's resolutions.
Oh, yeah.
Did you catch any?
No.
I didn't. So, folks, if you were hoping we were going to go through some of those, I'm so sorry. We will go through some of those maybe next week. But if you didn't post those, go to our YouTube channel for that video, or this one is fine too. Or email us, podcast@channelpronetwork.com. Tell us what your New Year's resolutions was, personal, business related, whatever, and we will absolutely cover those. So sorry we didn't get to it today, but lots and lots to go over today. We are Channel Pro Network on Facebook. We are at Channel Pro SMB on Twitter. If you want to follow me, I'm at Matt Whitlock. Rich, what are you on the Twitters?
At Rich Free.
And Jeff, are you on the Twitters?
I am, but I don't pay attention to it. So
don't follow Jeff on the Twitters. Just go and find him on YouTube at MSP Unplugged. Thank both of you for being here. Jeff, thanks again for being our guest host. And we will see everyone in episode 130 with a big no, that's not next week. That's the week after. But still, who do we have on 130? Joanna, right?
We do.
So quick teaser.
So we've introduced a new awards program here at Channel Pro that we're super excited about. It's called the Peer of the Year. Since the very first issue of Channel Pro in 2007, almost every cover of the magazine we've ever done has had one of your peers, an MSP, solution provider, a VAR, on the cover. What we're going to start to do now is look at, what we did this year in particular was look at the 12 people who made the cover over the course of 2019, and we picked the story that we felt had the most potential impact for the biggest portion of our audience, and we named that person, whose name is Joanna Sobrin. She's an MSP in the Chicago area. She is our very first Peer of the Year, and we will have her on the show next week.
Definitely something to look forward to. Nobody will want to miss that. Stick around. We'll see you in episode 130 next week.